There are many Beths in the world, shy and quiet, sitting in corners till needed, and living for others so cheerfully that no one sees the sacrifices till the little cricket on the hearth stops chirping and the sweet sunshiny presence vanishes, leaving silence and shadow behind. Louisa May Alcott, Little Women, Chapter 4.
Hello everyone, I am Marie of Historical Belle, and today I'm going to be making a dress for Beth March, the third sister of the March sisters, in Louisa May Alcott's famous novel, Little Women. Beth March is one of my favorite characters, I think, in all of literature. I distinctly remember when I first learned about Little Women in second grade. It was in my class library and I wanted to read it so bad, but for me in second grade it was such a long book and I struggled with reading for so long that it was not going to work out for me to read that book. But my godmother ended up giving me a radio play of Little Women that I listened to, and I was just transported. I absolutely fell in love with these characters, and I really identified with Beth March because when I first heard the story I was about her age. She would have been about my age, maybe just a smidge older when I first heard it. And I identified with her so strongly. I was also identified as a mouse at that time in my life. I was incredibly shy. I hated strangers. I still hate strangers. And I also loved music. I took piano lessons for a very short time when I was a little older. It wasn't really my thing, but I did play the flute. And that was like my instrument. Oh, and I also loved dolls. Just like Beth, she has this, she takes in dolls that need to be cared for that her older sisters have discarded, and I was obsessed with American Girl dolls, still am, kind of, and just so many of these things that, Beth loves, like her dolls, and, she would take care of them and play hospital with them, and my cousins and we had a very elaborate doll hospital set up in my grandma's basement from time to time. And I also love cats, just like Beth. She takes care of these sweet kittens, and I took care of kittens that would, just end up in our back bushes. They were strays that we would take in. So there were a lot of things that I very strongly identified with Beth March as a child. And now, as an adult, I still do, in a way, but I don't. And we were, doing this Little Women collaboration project, I, started rewatching, reading, looking into the Little Women story even more. And I felt this little bit of a disconnect between myself and Beth, which I hadn't when I originally read the book, or when I originally listened to the story. And that made me kind of sad that I don't see myself in her as much anymore. And I realized, as I am going back through this with this project, I don't see myself in Beth as much anymore because she never really got to grow up and I have, which is, just a very sad fact. Even though she's a character, she's not real, but she is real because Louisa May Alcott put so much of herself and her sister and her family life into the book. It's not quite autobiographical, but a lot of it is. And her sister, also named Elizabeth, they called her Lizzie instead of Beth though, died about at the same age as Beth, in her early 20s. So Beth would have been about 22, 23 at the time of her death. I'm 25, and that just, when I realized that, it was like, oh, that hurts, like that strikes to my inner Beth. So for this collab, each of us have taken a different March sister each of us being Melissa of Hat to Hem, Dixie of Dixie DIY, and Elise of Well Dressed Historian. All of their links are down below to their channels, and we're all putting out videos about this different March sister that we've created an outfit for. And we decided to take a look at the second half of the novel, which is Good Wives, about when they're older, when they're adults, rather than when they're children in the beginning of the novel, because we're all, well, adults. We're more of the age that the sisters would be in the second part of the novel. So it would make more sense for us to make outfits representing our correct ages. So for our dresses, we decided on the year 1867 to focus around for the style of the time. But with Beth, she is not into the heights of fashion at all. She is very much a homebody. She prefers to be cozy and comfortable. So I highly doubt she would have had a dress made for herself in that year, especially when she is going to die by the end of the decade. Something that was more, something that she would have been happier in, I think, is what I wanted to do for her. Because while she has like a cheerful expression, I think that she has a lot of internal dialogue that we just don't get to hear, or think like it just isn't evident in the novel. And I think it's far more complex than what we see in the novel, because the novel is a children's story, obviously, and therefore it does not always go into the most complexities, even though it does deal with a lot of really just hard human themes, like, well, being separated from your loved ones, death, jealousy. I was actually researching this, and Louisa May Alcott's sister, Beth, Lizzie, who Beth is based on, she did not die happily. She was angry that she was dying. And that is all kind of romanticized out of the Beth character. Probably for the sake of being a children's story, and also because it would probably have to be really painful for Louisa May Alcott to write a more realistic version of her sister's death. This is probably how she wished it could have happened if it had to happen like that, but because she was there for her sister's death. She, you know, in the novel, they were all sitting around the body, and that is what happened with Louisa when she was there. I wanted to make a dress for Beth that she would have had happier times in, but while still keeping to the second part of the novel, and something that she probably still would have been able to wear in 1867 if she felt good enough to go outside the home to an event, or just like out walking to see other people. So I decided to make a dress that is a little bit more 1865 in style, which is right at the beginning of the novel, of the second half of the novel, Good Wives. And basically I'm making Beth's best dress that she probably would have had made to wear to her sister Meg's wedding. In some of the different new costume versions of Little Women, you have her dressed in blue in the 2018 version, the PBS miniseries, or you have her dressed in purple and lavender when she was in the 2019 version. And then those two very stick out to me because they're both pastels. They're kind of in the same color palette. But I also was doing research, and I think I'm almost going like even more into Louisa May Alcott's actual life than just the novel itself, because I feel like the source of the text is her life, it is history. And Meg actually, the sister that would have been based on Meg, and she was actually, they actually still have her wedding dress at the museum, that Louisa May Alcott Home Museum, and it is a beautiful silver. It's not white because silver is far more practical. She could wear it again. It's easier to clean. so on and so forth. But a lot of times the bridesmaids, which were her sisters, would wear something that is similar to the bride. We've gotten away from that in America. In England, it's, where this kind of the Western idea of weddings kind of comes from with Queen Victoria and whatnot. And even dating back to even farther, like Roman times, the bridesmaids are there to basically distract evil spirits from the bride. So therefore, you want to kind of look like her to cause more distraction and confusion. So a lot of her sisters wore a beautiful kind of a gray color that was very similar to the bride. Also, when the sisters received their copies of Pilgrim's Progress, the color that is given to Beth is a dove gray, and I think that is a reflection of her personality, her kind of being like this quiet, cooing dove, and also that obviously had to be a color that she liked, because that is what, Marmee has chosen for her. So I decided to choose a beautiful gray wool to make the dress out of. I had this wool because it's left over from my 70s, 80s engagement dress project that I did when I became engaged to my now husband. When we were affianced, we did this beautiful, fun kind of Victorian photo shoot to celebrate our engagement and our love of history and costumes, which brought us together. And I ended up buying way too much fabric for it, so I had leftover of that. And that feels like something that would have happened to Beth. She's the third child. She would have gotten hand-me-downs and leftovers all the time. So it feels very Beth like that to have this, to be using this leftovers for her project. It's also the right color. It's that dove gray. It's also a wool, and I think this would have, if for a good dress, you would have usually had silk or wool. In the 1860s, cotton was considered to be much cheaper. Also, the March family, as well as the Alcott family, were very strong abolitionists, believing in the cause of ending slavery, and therefore, but they were also kind of poor, so I would assume that they would try not to buy cotton as much as they could, because of course cotton is at this time inherently linked to the Southern institution of slavery. Therefore, I thought the wool was also a good choice, thinking about the morals and the choices that Beth and her family would have made.
For this dress, I used past patterns, plated or gauged skirt pattern as a base, and then I also used truly Victorian darted bodice pattern. This kind of bodice was seen as casual wear in 1860, but by 1863, this kind of darted bodice with the two-piece coat sleeve had become incredibly popular and was more accepted for more fancy occasions, for better dresses. And then when we hit 1865, it becomes the absolute most common style of bodice, and it remains so for the remainder of the decade. So you might see, if you watch all of our videos, some similarities, and that is because, well, it is the most common style of bodice. Here I am cutting out the bodice pattern out of the gray wool, and then also I am using my absolute favorite white bed sheets to create a lining for this bodice. I am then going to iron and pin the lining to my pretty wool, and then I'm going to stitch all around in a process called flat lining. Flat lining in sewing is when you sew two pieces of fabric together to line as well as strengthen the outer fabric, and then once you sew them together, it then acts like those two pieces of fabric act like one piece of fabric. It was very, very common in Victorian dress construction. I will be doing this to all pieces of the bodice. So of course there's the center back piece, the side back pieces, and then the front bodice pieces, I will be lining the sleeves. I will not be flat lining the sleeves. So the sleeves will be sewn together, and then the lining will be sewed together, and then they will be put in, and then the lining will be attached to the sleeves. Here are all of the pieces of my bodice once they have been flat lined, and of course Lucky is the best sewing helper in the world. I accidentally flat lined my 2 bodice pieces in the same direction, so I'm going to have to redo that, but the bodice back was looking great, and the sleeves, well, I need to attach the 2-piece coat sleeve together. These 2-piece coat sleeves are to emulate a man's coat sleeves. They were very popular in the late 1860s, and they were supposed to look masculine. I had never made ones like this for a lady's dress. I made a man's coat before, though. I absolutely hated setting in these sleeves. I had to do it multiple times. I was not a fan.
Oh my goodness. These sleeves were so annoying, but they're on now, finally. And I even did the little piping thing that you're supposed to make it the most historically accurate. I find it tedious, so in some of my past creations I have not done that. Tisk tisk on me, I know. But I've been trying to get better about finishing details. So we have them here. And I'm actually really happy with how it looks. I think it really adds something to this, especially with the sleeve just being like a 2-piece coat sleeve. And goodness gracious, the pattern did not fit together. There are lots of alterations. And I still need to trim like the inside here. It's a whole thing. But let's try it on and see how it looks on me. So far, I like the sleeve length. They're a little bit long. They come almost like down to my mid-hand here, but I kind of like that, and I think Beth would also like that because I kind of like is like I am going to hide in my sleeves. Yes, Lucky. But other than that, I think it is good because you know if I extend my arms too much out, then you know you don't want it to like come up too much. But if I'm, you know, holding my hands like here, like a good little proper Victorian lady, then I think they are the perfect length. And if I have them down, it's just like, I don't know, they're just at such an interesting angle, these sleeves. They were very popular in the late 1860s. Well, starting like really 1863-ish, going to like 1867, if you want to be really technical. So now I'm going to start on the skirt, and I think I was going to need a waistband. And I think this bodice is actually going to need to come up a little bit because the waistline in 1865 had started to move up this is like right below my natural waist, but usually by the time I attach a skirt, it hits like right at the natural waist. So if I have a waistband though, it's going to need to come up just a smidge by maybe like an inch, and then have an inch waistband for that. I've never done a skirt quite like this. It's going to have a flat front, so I'm a little nervous about it, but we'll see what happens.
I am very proud of how this piping turned out. It took me like 3 times to do it, but it looks really good. So let's have a close-up of it. Now I am going to attach the collar. So I decided to do a stand-up collar according to the pattern. It says that this style of collar is really a post-1864 collar, and it's called a pointed stand collar, and it was really popular later in the decade of the 1860s. As I was looking through my Pinterest board of inspiration, most of the collars that I saw
for dresses post 1865 did have these nice little stand-up collars. So I had never done one before, but I was happy to experiment, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. I added some lace to mine, and I really like that subtle detail. I decided to close up the front of this dress with hook and eye tape, my absolute favorite closure method ever. And of course, I just stitched that on with my sewing machine. Lucky, again, being the best sewing helper. Now it's time for the skirt. I just cut out the waistband, and now I'm using that past pattern really just as a guide for length. I cut out several panels. I don't exactly remember how many, and that I ended up not using all of them because I'm making a skirt that has a flatter front, which the bulk of the skirt became flatter in the front and moved towards the back until we get bustle dresses in the 1870s. I had never made a dress quite like this before. Usually I have them pleated or gathered all the way around. So I was using one dress inspiration in particular from a collection which is held in the UK. Is a wool or wool mixture dress dated to 1866 to 1867. And it's more of a work ensemble, but I really liked how it had a defined flat front, but then had gathers all around it. In the center back, I decided to do a small section of hand pleated cartridge gathers, and then I directional pleated back to the front straight section on the waistband. I then attached the waistband to the skirt. It took a little bit of finagling because I had a little bit too much bulk and too much fabric in the skirt, so I had to redo it a few times, but eventually we got it right. And then also I wanted the waistband to match up with the bodice, of course, with a small overlap in the front, which also took some calculating, but we made it work. I then attached the skirt to the bodice, and this is where I had about an inch above the bottom of the bodice, and I attached the skirt there so it would be a little above or like right at my natural waist, which would be more of a proper silhouette for post 1865. Now it's time for the trim. I've looked at a lot of different ways that dresses were trimmed in the later half of the 1860s, and it seems like geometric designs were all the rage. I found a couple copies that I really liked where it had a very square neckline and then went down along the buttons on the front opening, and I really liked that. Now, for earlier in the later half of the 1860s, the square neckline was super popular and it would go all the way out to the shoulders. But then as we get closer to the 1870s, things get narrower. So if Beth had this dress in 1865, she still might have had the trim redone to look better and more fashionable for later in the decade. And once I was done with the trim, the dress was done. Beth was too bashful to go to school. It had been tried, but she suffered so much that it was given up, and she did her lessons at home with her father. Even when he went away and her mother was called to devote her skill and energy to the Soldiers' Aid Societies, Beth went faithfully on by herself and did the best she could. She was a housewifey little creature, and helped Hannah keep home neat and comfortable for the workers, never thinking of any reward but to be loved. I'm not like the rest of you. I never made any plans about what I do when I grow up. I never thought of being married as you did, and I couldn't seem to imagine myself as anything but stupid little Beth, trotting around the home of no use anywhere but there. I never wanted to go away, and the hard part now is leaving you all. I'm not afraid, but it seems as if I should be homesick for you, even in heaven.